For the past several months, I thought I was dealing with something fairly normal, or at least explainable: sleep paralysis. I'd read about it before, heard stories, seen it portrayed in movies. People waking up trapped in their bodies, completely alert but unable to move, speak, or scream. Some claim to see demons, shadowy figures, or hear voices whispering in the dark. Mine wasn't like that. Not at first. I'd wake up, mind completely awake, but paralyzed from head to toe. No whispers, no entities in the room, just stillness and the crushing weight of immobility. It would usually last anywhere from 30 seconds to a few minutes, and each time I'd just lie there, staring helplessly at the ceiling fan above my bed, counting my heartbeats and willing my fingers to twitch. It started maybe once or twice a month, enough to disturb me but not frequent enough to cause real alarm. I figured it was probably stress or maybe my awful sleep schedule catching up to me. I worked long hours, and some nights I wouldn't get to bed until 3 or 4 a.m. My brain still buzzing from caffeine and blue light. When I brought it up to my doctor during a checkup, he gave me that sympathetic nod and told me what I'd already read online. It's harmless, common even, likely linked to stress, disrupted REM cycles, anxiety. Just try to sleep better. So I brushed it off. I stopped talking about it, just dealt with it like I dealt with everything else, quietly and alone. That was until a few weeks ago. That night changed everything. I'd gone to bed a little after midnight. I remember checking the time, 12:07 a.m., right after I plugged my phone in and turned off the lamp. It was a quiet night. Rain pattered softly against the windows, and the occasional rumble of distant thunder rolled through the city. I remember thinking how peaceful it sounded, like nature's white noise. Comforting almost. Then sometime in the dead of night, I woke up. At first, it felt like one of the usual episodes. My eyes fluttered open, and immediately I knew something was wrong. That awful weight, the total absence of control. I couldn't move. Not a toe, not a finger. I tried to scream, but my throat was locked tight. Then I noticed something new. Movement. Out of the corner of my eye, barely within my peripheral vision, I saw a figure standing right beside my bed. Still. Silent. My heart jumped into my throat. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light. Just my brain conjuring a silhouette like it sometimes does during dreams. Maybe the shadow of my coat rack, warped by moonlight. But no, this was different. This was real. I could feel it, a pressure in the air, the faint scent of sweat, like someone had been standing there for a long time. The mattress dipped slightly beside me. He was leaning down, close. The fear that gripped me in that moment is hard to explain. It was primal, raw. Every part of me screamed to move, to run, to defend myself. But I was a prisoner in my own body. Then he reached out and did something that still haunts me. He brushed the hair away from my face. Slow, gentle, intimate. The way you might touch someone you loved or someone you were trying not to wake. That was no hallucination, no demon born of brain chemistry. That was a person, flesh and blood. The next thing I remember is waking up to sunlight pouring in through my curtains. I was alone. I could move again. Everything in my room looked untouched, exactly as I had left it. No open windows, no overturned furniture. The door was locked. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before sitting up, drenched in cold sweat. My neck ached, my heart still pounding hours later. I told myself it had to be a dream, a very real, very vivid nightmare, but something inside me knew better. The next night, I propped my phone up on my dresser and set it to record. I didn't tell anyone. I just needed proof, for my own sanity. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd watch the footage and see nothing. That's what I hoped for, honestly. The following morning, I scrolled through 3 hours of footage. It was boring. Just me sleeping, tossing and turning occasionally. For a while, I felt relieved. Then I reached the 3:15 a.m. mark. The video jumped slightly, like the camera picked up motion. The door to my bedroom opened, not creaked, not slammed, just opened. Calm, quiet, intentional. A man stepped inside. My blood ran cold. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, possibly a hoodie, and he moved with eerie familiarity, like he belonged there. No rush, no hesitation. He approached my bed, standing over me for what felt like forever. The camera, low resolution in the dark, didn't capture his face clearly, just his silhouette in his stillness. Then from his pocket, he pulled something. I couldn't tell what it was at first. He leaned over me. His hand moved toward my face. Then he stood there again, just watching, motionless, like he was admiring something. That was when I stopped the video. I nearly dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. My mind scrambled for any kind of explanation that didn't involve what I was beginning to realize. This wasn't sleep paralysis. This wasn't stress. This was someone. I called the police. They took the footage seriously. One of the officers noticed something behind my left ear, a small puncture mark, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A toxicology screen showed traces of a paralytic agent in my system, something used in rare medical procedures, fast-acting, but short-lived. I didn't even know how to react. The room hadn't been broken into. The lock showed no signs of tampering. There were no fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing. The officers told me, carefully, that whoever this was probably had a key or had found a way to copy one. And this wasn't the first time. Based on the drug levels and the regularity of the sleep paralysis episodes, he'd likely been doing this for months. Every time I thought I was waking up, unable to move, caught in a half-dream, I wasn't. He was there, in the room, standing over me, touching me, watching me sleep. They haven't caught him yet, and I don't know if they ever will. I've since moved, changed the locks, bought cameras, alarms, changed every piece of security I could. But sleep doesn't come easy anymore. Every creak, every shadow, every faint shift in air feels like a threat. The idea that sleep paralysis was a disorder, something internal and explainable, was terrifying. But the truth? That's so much worse. Because sometimes, the monster isn't in your mind. It's real, and it has a key. I've been dealing with sleep paralysis since I was about 8 or 9 years old. It's been a part of my life for so long that I've grown accustomed to the terrifying predictability of it. Waking up paralyzed, unable to speak, a crushing weight on my chest, and always the shadowy silhouette of a man, what people call the Hat Man, lurking in the corners of my vision. Over time, I learned to endure it, wait it out, and tell myself it was just my brain misfiring during the transition between sleep and wakefulness. But something happened about a week ago that shook me deeper than any of those past experiences. I'm in my early 20s now, and I know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. I know what my mind is capable of conjuring when it's stressed, overtired, or frightened. But this was something else entirely. That week had already been brutal. I was barely sleeping, maybe 3 or 4 hours a night, juggling work, school, and personal stress. The night of the episode, I went to bed at around 2 a.m., mentally and physically drained. I remember waking up briefly around 6 a.m., rolling over and falling back asleep again. That second sleep felt different, thick, heavy, like I was sinking beneath the surface of a dark, still ocean. When I woke up again, it was around 9 a.m. My eyes opened slowly to the ceiling, and I realized I was lying on my back, something I usually avoid because it tends to trigger my sleep paralysis. But I didn't notice it right away. At first, everything seemed normal. The room was dimly lit by the morning light squeezing through the blinds, and a faint hum from the living room fan reached my ears. Then I heard it, quick, erratic footsteps, like several people sprinting up and down the hallway just outside my door. It didn't sound like regular running. It was chaotic, bare feet slapping against hardwood with urgency and no rhythm, as if the runners were chasing or being chased. I blinked, trying to focus. The footsteps kept going, now joined by whispers. Low, fast, overlapping voices, impossible to distinguish but clearly not friendly. Still half asleep, I told myself it was just my brain playing tricks. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe the sounds were coming from the neighbors, or the TV someone had left on. I tried to lift my head and turn toward the door, which sits parallel to the corkboard hanging on my wall. That's when I realized I couldn't move. Not even a twitch. Panic flared in my chest. The only thing I could move were my eyes. I scanned the room, forcing myself to remain calm, trying to remember that this was just another episode, but it didn't feel like the others. It felt deeper, more invasive. My eyes landed on the corkboard, and that's when I saw him. A shadow, a tall, scraggly outline of a man, was slowly emerging from behind the board, as if peeling himself from the very wall. The corkboard didn't move, but the darkness behind it thickened and took form. He didn't glide or float. He oozed out of the plaster like black ink spreading through water. This wasn't the Hat Man. This was something leaner, more twisted. His body was thin and angular, with elongated arms that nearly reached his knees. His fingers stretched unnaturally long and looked as though they were made of brittle wire. His smile was impossibly wide, stretching ear to ear, showing rows of pointed, too human teeth. His eyes were huge, glass-like, reflective, and full of a terrible awareness. He looked at me like someone watching their prey slowly realize it has nowhere to run. The whispers grew louder. The laughter started, quiet at first, then growing, childlike giggles mixed with something deeper, more guttural, like growls disguised as amusement. The footsteps hadn't stopped. They pounded down the hall as if a crowd was circling, getting closer. I couldn't scream. I couldn't whisper. I couldn't even blink. The shadow man's gaze pinned me to the bed. He seemed to know that I could see him, and he wanted me to. His eyes widened, and that grotesque grin somehow stretched wider. He began moving toward me, not walking, gliding across the floor with no movement in his legs. With every inch he closed, my eyes got heavier, like an invisible hand was pushing my lids down, trying to make me sleep again. I fought it with everything I had. I strained every muscle, willing myself to move, to yell, to do something. My chest burned with the pressure. I opened my eyes again with force, and he was closer. Now just a few feet away from the edge of the bed. I could make out the grainy texture of his skin, like smoke and static had been woven together to shape him. The laughter swelled all around me now, echoing off the walls. It wasn't just him. There were others. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them closing in, crowding the hallway, crowding the room. Unseen, but present, he leaned forward slightly, his mouth twitching as if he were on the verge of speaking. But instead of words, a long, slow, rattling breath escaped him, like the death rattle of someone who hadn't breathed in centuries. The sound seeped into my ears and settled in my chest. And for a moment, I wondered if I was going to die right there, silently crushed by whatever force was feeding on me. My eyes started closing again. I tried to open them, but they felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was that grin, closer than ever, and those eyes reflecting not just me, but the hallway, filled with more shadows, watching. Then, just like that, it was over. My sleep paralysis started in 2019, right after I moved away from home to attend college. It was a private religious school in Manila, an old institution with decades of history. The church, dormitories, classrooms, and administrative buildings were all located within the same gated compound. On the surface, it was serene and quiet, even beautiful in the late afternoon light. But I always felt like something about the place was heavy, like the air there carried weight. I stayed in a dorm with 11 other girls, all packed into a long, rectangular room filled with bunk beds. We didn't have much privacy, but there was comfort in the routine and in having other people around. Every night at exactly 9 p.m., we would gather in a circle for evening prayer. No one ever skipped it unless they were sick or had permission to leave. It felt almost sacred, like a spiritual obligation rather than a tradition. One night I was exhausted and emotionally drained from school and stress. I wasn't in the mood to sit up straight and mumble through another prayer, so I decided to fake being asleep. I climbed into my bunk early and lay on my back, facing the ceiling. I pulled the blanket over me and tried to keep my breathing steady. The other girls gathered in their usual prayer circle near the center of the room. I remember clearly how one of them began the prayer. "Dear God in heaven." The moment she spoke those words, It was like someone turned off the switch to my body. My limbs went numb instantly. My breath caught in my chest, and a thick, heavy fog rolled into my consciousness. It felt like I was falling into something deep and bottomless, even though I hadn't moved. My ears were ringing, and the world around me grew distorted. I could still hear the girls praying, but it sounded like they were underwater, muffled and distant, like I was eavesdropping from another world. I tried to call out, to move, to scream, but nothing happened. My lips wouldn't part. My arms wouldn't respond. I was trapped inside my own body, completely helpless. It only ended when one of my friends came over and sat on my bed after the prayer. She said later that I looked like I was convulsing, my face twisted, my eyes fluttering, mouth slightly open. She called my name and started shaking me violently. After a few moments, I snapped out of it like a rubber band pulled too tight, finally breaking free. I gasped, chest heaving like I had just surfaced from deep underwater. The room fell silent. We all stayed up that night, frightened and unsure of what had just happened. Ever since that night, the episodes became more frequent. At first, they were random, but eventually I began noticing patterns, especially when I slept on my back. That position became like a trigger. I learned to recognize the signs. There was always this low, rumbling sound, like a deep bass drum, far away but closing in. That sound was my warning. When I heard it, I would fight with everything I had to keep myself awake. If I didn't, I knew I'd fall into that state again. When it happened, I was fully aware, trapped in a state of consciousness while my body remained frozen. I could feel everything, hear everything, but I couldn't move or scream. I began whispering prayers in my head, over and over, pleading for release. Most times it helped. I'd break free, gasping for air, drenched in sweat, heart racing like I'd run a marathon. But the worst part? When I opened my eyes during these episodes, I wasn't in a dream world. I was in the same room. Same bed, same furniture, same walls. But everything felt off. The shadows stretched too long. The corners of the ceiling seemed warped. It was like I was in a darker version of reality. A place that mirrored the real world but was infected with something evil. Like I had slipped into a spiritual underworld that existed parallel to ours. Then came the night I'll never forget, the night I saw it. It happened a few years later. I was married by then and had mostly learned how to avoid the paralysis. I never slept on my back anymore and tried to stick to a routine. But that night, for some reason, I must have rolled onto my back in my sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was cold, unnaturally cold. Our bedroom looked the same, but slightly darker. The walls seemed brittle, torn around the edges like they were decaying. I sensed it immediately. Something was watching me. I turned toward my husband. He was lying still, asleep. I nudged him gently. No response. I whispered his name. Nothing. I began to shake him, harder this time. Then I realized he wasn't moving because I wasn't moving. My body was frozen again. I was back in the paralysis and dread filled my chest like ice water. I tried to pray, to scream inside my head. That's when my husband turned to face me. At first, I felt relief, but that comfort died in an instant when he climbed on top of me, straddling my chest and pressing down. He started choking me, his hands wrapped around my neck, not hard at first, almost hesitantly, but then they tightened. His expression was blank, cold, not my husband. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to see what he really was, but something compelled me to open them, just once. I wish I hadn't. At first, I still saw his face, but as I kept staring, his features began to shift. His skin seemed to sag and ripple, like wax melting from a candle. His body thinned out, his hands became more skeletal. Then he transformed completely into a female figure with hollow, pitiless eyes and a smile stretched far too wide. She radiated pure evil. I tried to scream a prayer over and over in my mind. She laughed. Her voice was deep and echoing, mocking. "That's not going to help you," she said. I kept repeating the prayer, again and again. I focused all my energy on breaking free. I fought like I never had before. Then, like a thread snapping, I woke up. I bolted upright, gasping, clutching my chest. My husband stirred next to me, groggy and confused. "You okay?" he mumbled. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. I didn't tell him what I saw. I haven't slept on my back since. My sister knows all about my sleep paralysis. She's heard every story. She believes something dark attached itself to me while I was at that school. Something evil. At first I thought it was superstition, but recently I found out that the land our school was built on was once part of a World War battleground. Hundreds, maybe thousands of soldiers died there. Unmarked graves, buried memories, blood-soaked soil. Maybe that explains the heaviness. Maybe something did follow me. I don't know what it was I saw that night, but I know it wasn't a dream. It was real, and it's still watching. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories. If you did, don't forget to drop a comment with your favorite one, hit that like button, and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales coming your way. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.